Hey you, how are you? It's Techie Mesh again. This time I want to talk about your better half. Your better half, how they come through during grief, during mourning period, and just throughout the whole process. And I think it's important to highlight that um, a death of a loved one sometimes can destroy your relationships, if I can say that. Because what happens is, if you don't get the right support, it's very detrimental. So for me, my wife was very supportive. Unfortunately, she had lost her dad a few years back before. So when I lost my dad, she was there, and she was there purposefully, and she was there um, very intentional. So I was able to, number one, get the support from her. Number two, just have her hold my hand when I just didn't know when I was lost, when I didn't know what was going on with me. And when you lose a loved one, that shoulder to lean on is very important. Now, the reason I'm saying this is for me as a man, and speaking from my own experience, my father was an authoritative figure for me. So it's God first, then my dad, then down to me. Um, so when I lost my dad, he was out of the picture, God and me, and there was that gap. Um, just realizing that the gap now existed, and the authority that was over me in human form was no longer there. Um, it was a challenge to reach up to God because of the gap, and I was very mindful of the gap that existed. So with my wife coming in, she was able to raise me, hold me, and raise me up to come into the gap. And during the funeral, during the mourning period and the funeral time, she was very impactful in planning and planning for the trips, packing, and all that. Then I traveled to my dad's funeral, and even there, she was very impactful and very um, resourceful. And then after the funeral, being able to lift me to that space where I was now stepping in my own life, and I'm not talking about in the family, in my own life. Now, me stepping as the authority in my own life. And crazy enough, I was working for a multinational company, and my manager was from a different race. At that time, the department I was in was shut down because of cuts, and then I was moved to a different department that I didn't even interview for. I had not asked to work for. It was an absorption while they were restructuring and everything. The manager there was very authoritative and was trying to push the authority down to me. And the first thing I did was reject the authority. Um, and we used to have meetings. We used to have one-on-ones. And needless to say that they were not pretty. I would say stuff. I was just openly tell him, hey, listen, I didn't interview for you to be my manager. I didn't interview for this job. I was interviewed. I was highly qualified. Now here you expect me to do A, B, C, D. That was not in my job description. Over there, I did everything and highly recommended. And he didn't like it that somebody was pushing to his authority, and managers have the right to hire and fire. So he just gave me a dismissal. I saw it coming. I didn't care. And I think that's what grief does to you. You don't care. And now you can imagine in your relationship, in your spouse, and you've reached that point, and your wife or your husband is pushing you to do these changes, and you don't care. And that is how sometimes relationships break. You just don't care. Someone is telling you something. Oh, hey, can you do you need to do this for us. And you're like, I don't care. I just, buried my dad, and right now in other words, you're saying in your heart, I am hurting, and all you're asking me is all these things. Are you asking me to do all this? Like I was telling the manager, you're asking me to do all these things. I don't care. This job doesn't it does I don't even have the taste of it in my mouth right now because I just buried a loved one. And who are you to tell me this is how life should continue? And now in a marriage or a relationship or whatever the situation is, when that situation comes in, it's very detrimental. And that is why I started by saying a lot of relationships break after a funeral, after death of a loved one, uh, and people try to mend it. But the person who is grieving is so far, is in a distant place, but the person who is next to them does not understand that they're in a distant place. And just to throw that fishing line and catch them and bring them back slowly, you know. And I remember a friend of mine said this, your dad is dead and you've buried him, and you're feeling that gap existing, and the other person is like, you, I want you to do this, you, I want you to do that. And you're like, why do you want me to do that? you know forget everyone. And you see, out of that, a lot of time you find people either uh, go to become workaholics, or they get into depression, or they stop working at all, become addicts, or just disappear, and they are no longer there. They are spaced out. They are there physically, they are there, but emotionally they are a shell. It's just an empty space because that person never had a healing to come through. And it is very integral. If you lose someone, it's very integral. uh, the crazy thing is, you can't tell someone this is how I feel, because during grief, one of the things is you don't even know how to express yourself, and the other person has to, literally. And I hope someone watching this be able to go back and ask the other person. And the question you ask the other person is not how are you today. No, is, I think the right questions that should be asked is, for example, one of them is, how are you feeling about your dad? How are you feeling since um, since last week we talked about your dad? Can you tell me a fond memory about your dad? One of the things like you've never shared about your dad to me. Like when you tell them to talk about the other person, they will tell you about what they want to say through that story. Uh, and for me, what I did a lot, my wife used to push me a lot, is during dinner to talk about my dad to the kids on the story form. And I used to talk about how my dad was, hey, my dad was a disciplinarian, but he also tell us these stories. Oh, tell us more of these stories now. Tell some of this uh, folklore that he used to tell us, the children, and that kind of would bring me back to getting there. And I hope someone who is listening will get this point, that if your loved one has lost a loved one, it is your job to go in there and get them back. And getting them back is not about you. It's not about you. It's about them. So you putting yourself aside and going to them and saying, "Hey, how um, how are you today?" Or, "Oh, hey, can we take a walk? You know, I remember your uncle said this during the funeral. What was that about?" You know, and help them heal back. A lot of people are lost after a funeral. They're totally lost. You can imagine someone who's being held by their hand from childhood, and now that person is gone. So you can imagine that. So that's the other thing I wanted to talk about today.